Good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of you who have joined us. My name is Jonathan Kang with Cloudian, and I want to welcome all of you to our webinar today on data management and protection strategies with Komprise and Cloudian. Joining us today are Jon Toor, CMO at Cloudian, and Krishna Subramanian, COO at Komprise. We'll go over today's key challenges and provide two specific customer examples detailing those challenges. Jon and Krishna will then demonstrate how Cloudian and Komprise together has helped solve those challenges. I'll let Jon take it from here. Jon?
Thank you very much, Johnson, and really appreciate all of you signing on and joining us today for this webinar. I think we've got a really exciting topic because data management is a challenge for everybody. Everybody knows that the growing volumes of data we're trying to manage in our environments today. I think this chart is something that's very familiar to all of you. You're living it every day, right? The fact that unstructured data is growing at 50% per year is something that everyone feels in their overall management environment. And the reality is that we know this is not slowing down. We know that the rate of growth continues to accelerate. And IDC predicts, 44 zettabytes under management and global data by the year 2020. This is something we see in all industries. It affects all of us because everybody has the challenge of dealing with higher density resolution in data delivery, whether it's the sensors we use for picking up things from the factory floor, whether it's video cameras that are operating at 4K and 8K, whether it's medical devices which are delivering higher resolutions in their diagnostic modalities, or it's just the need to retain larger amounts of big data for future analysis. The data is, of course, the future lifeblood of your industry, and ultimately is what we're going to learn from. So as AI, ML becomes more and more a part of our lives, everybody will be impacted by that. So the reality is that no matter what industry you're in, the challenge of managing large amounts of unstructured data is something that everyone contends with. Whether you're in manufacturing, financial, healthcare, it really doesn't matter. Everybody sees the challenge of managing this data. So in today's webcast, we'll talk about two specific examples of customers where we face that challenge, and then show you a little bit about how the solution works to make data management simpler. And with that, I'll turn it over to Krishna to introduce these two customer scenarios.
Perfect. Thanks, Jon. And so here are two customer examples, and let's walk through them. So one customer that Cloudian and Komprise together worked with is a global real estate management firm. They have offices all over the globe. They have data centers in Europe and in North America. And the challenge they had is that they had petabytes of data. Most of it was unstructured, so it's things like listings and escrow documents and material like that. It's mostly unstructured file data in their environment. And they had a backup solution that they wanted to revamp. They wanted to go to a more modern backup solution, but they realized that because of how much data they had, which was over 2-3 petabytes of data, backing up that entire footprint meant buying a significant amount of backup storage. And modernizing that backup, they just couldn't afford it. They couldn't afford to buy a new backup solution. So Komprise and Cloudian went in and helped them afford a new backup solution at 20% of the original cost. And we'll show you how we did that and the benefit that the customer realized through this presentation. So definitely making backups smaller and making backups more efficient is a pretty important consideration when you're looking at growing amounts of unstructured data. The second thing we see is a lot of customers have data that has accumulated over time. So our second example is a research university here in the United States, and this university is over 20 plus years old, and their researchers have been accumulating data over all this time. So they had an enormous amount of legacy data. But as we all know, research data is pretty valuable, and so it's really hard to go in and delete all that important research information. So the question for a lot of customers is, how can you retain valuable legacy data but reduce the cost of managing that footprint? This customer, like many others, were running out of NAS capacity, and they were coming up on a NAS refresh. So they either had to renew their maintenance with their primary vendor like NetApp or Isilon, or they had to do something different. And so Cloudian and Komprise went in, and we helped this customer offload all their cold data from their NAS environment and save over 70% of costs. And again, we'll walk through this example as we describe our solution and show you how this customer accomplished it. So really, today's webinar is going to focus on two big themes. One is, how do you make backups more manageable and affordable as your data footprint grows? And how do you offload cold data from your actively managed footprint so that you can reduce and actually maybe upgrade your NAS while still cutting costs? So one of the things we hear, with customers as they're going through their environment is, as this data problem compounds, even as more and more data keeps coming in, these problems are only getting worse, and the pain is getting more acute. And I know a lot of customers today are looking at ways to solve management of massive amounts of data, but you are also faced with new things like the cloud. And so, John, I don't know if you want to share a little bit of what we hear from customers when they're looking at options such as the cloud.
Yeah, exactly, Krishna. I think that's a huge concern, is that everyone is looking to simplify their environments. But at the same time, the cloud offers lots of new options about how you can do things differently. So how do you leverage the cloud? Well, at the same time, simplifying your overall management environment. And I think that's really what Cloudian and Komprise can really do together. And just to put a little more spotlight on the cloud in particular, the question comes in: how do I implement hybrid cloud? Because I need data on-prem to accelerate my backup processes. You mentioned that making backup more affordable is certainly a key element of this. But at the same time as making it more affordable, you also need it to continue to meet your RTO and RPO objectives. Those are still the paramount concern. How can I use hybrid cloud to do that? Keep my backup copy on-prem while cost effectively utilizing the cloud as a DR site. So that's one question. Another concern is, if I'm dealing with multiple clouds, how do I accommodate that? Many people are now saying, I'm not going to be tied into just one public cloud provider. I want the flexibility to use others so I can leverage their capabilities, leverage individual cost deals, keep my flexibility up as opposed to being locked in. And then finally, I've got a lot of data that's cold. How do I manage all of that while leveraging the cloud to take advantage of its capabilities without sacrificing my flexibility? And that's really what this whole solution is about: is making the cloud a part of your environment without sacrificing your need to maintain flexibility. So I think that's really the lead into the Komprise part of the solution. I'll let you go through the overall concerns there and get to that great demo.
Perfect, John. So just to kind of recap the problems that John and I highlighted. Data is growing really fast, but most environments have flat budgets. So if you're looking at 20, 30, 40, sometimes 200% year-over-year data growth, but your budget's only growing at 2 or 3%, then you have to do more with less. And the big challenge many IT organizations that we talk to have is that it's not that we don't know that a lot of the data is inactive and cold, and it's not that we don't know that there's more efficient ways to manage data, but it's really hard to get visibility into what's happening to your data, because data is sitting in many different silos. It's accumulated over time. many users who created the data may no longer even be here. As a result, IT is making very critical decisions of how much storage to buy, how much to back up, what kind of backup environments to use. All these kinds of decisions are being made in the dark. And that's the first thing that we help you with. We provide you visibility into your data so you no longer have to have inefficient over-provisioning. You no longer have to manage hot and cold data the same way. You no longer have to back up data that's not at all changing, and instead you can use a resilient environment like Cloudian, which is already keeping multiple copies of your data. So let's get right into the solution and show you how we address these problems. So first, let me give you a quick overview of our architecture. So essentially, Komprise is a software solution. So there is really no hardware you need to buy to run Komprise. It just runs as one or more virtual machines. And what you would do if you're interested in our joint solution is you would bring down a Komprise observer, that's what we call our virtual machine. You would bring it up in your environment, and you would literally just start pointing it at your storage. Any storage you have today that deals with NFS or SMB is storage we can look at. So once you point this at your storage, Komprise will show you analytics, and I'm going to show you those analytics in a demo. And in Komprise, you could set policies on, what you want to do with your cold data, how much you want to move to a place like Cloudian. Do you want to put a copy of your data on Cloudian instead of keeping it on an expensive mirror? Those kinds of things you can actually set up. And once you're done, Komprise actually moves the data to Cloudian, and all the data looks like it's still there on your NetApp or Isilon. So essentially, we're giving you a solution that gives you visibility across your entire footprint, lets you manage data across your current NAS environment and a object environment like Cloudian with no change for users and applications, no disruption for the users and applications. So with that background, let's actually jump right in and show you, how the two products work. And there's no better way to show you something than with a live demo. So why don't we just go into the demo next? So I'm actually going to bring up a screen and show you how you can get an analysis of what's going on in your environment. Let's say you want to try Cloudian and Komprise. We would set you up with a proof of value assessment, and we would give you a Komprise virtual machine. You would literally just power it on in your environment, and once you power it on, you would connect it to all the storage that you want to look at. It could be anything that has NFS and SMB shares on it. So it could be, in this example, we have some NetApp 7 mode filers, some Isilon filers, some NetApp C. 8 and 9 mode filers, some Windows servers, etc. So you just pick the shares you want to look at, and once you do that, even if you have petabytes of data, within minutes, Komprise will start showing you analytics. The first thing it shows you is what we call the green donut. I mean, literally, it gives you a view of how much data you have and how much data is hot and how much data is cold. In most environments, over 75% of the data hasn't been touched in a year or more. And that's kind of what you're seeing here. And that's pretty typical of what we see with most customers. You can also get a sense of how fast your data is growing. So if you did nothing, in this example, the amount of storage your data will consume will go up from 195 terabytes to 264 terabytes if you did nothing because of the rate at which your data is growing. But in addition to that, this is just the data that's sitting on primary storage. Remember that with data, we don't just keep one copy of it, right? So if you have this 200 terabytes of data, you're keeping 200 terabytes on your NetApp or Isilon or some primary storage, but you're also probably putting a mirror of it in another site for DR purposes, and then you're keeping 2 or 3 backups of it. So really, this 200 terabytes of data is actually about a petabyte of data managed because of those 4 additional copies, 1 DR and 3 backup. And if you consider that 75% of the data is cold, if you remove that, you not only shrink the primary storage, but you also shrink the mirror and you shrink the backup. And as Jon mentioned, because Cloudian is a resilient store, you're not really losing anything on the durability of that data, but you are getting a much more cost-efficient solution. So you get an analysis of your data. You can also get to see, what is actually this data, what kinds of files are they, how big are they, is it big files or small files, who's using it, where does the data actually sit, etc. So, but with all this analytics, it's not just an analytics solution. You can actually set policies. And as you set policies, you can see how much you're going to save in your own environment. So for example, let's say anything over 6 months old, we want to move to a bucket in Cloudian. So I could just set that policy, and as I did that, if you notice, this orange sliver changed. It's saying that in this example, actually 95% of the data will end up getting moved, and it's going to save me 250 terabytes of capacity and over 3 times that amount of backup, and here's my cost savings. And all these costs you can edit and put in your own costs, as it pertains to your environment. So you can set your different policies. And as John said, a lot of customers are going to a hybrid cloud now. So maybe you want to put a second copy somewhere else. You can set whatever policies you want, and you can visualize their impact. And when you're ready to go, all you need to do is activate. And when you activate, Komprise will actually start moving the data for you to Cloudian based on these policies. And when it moves the data, I'm going to just go back to the slides and show you what happens. When it moves the data, the entire move is transparent. So Komprise has this patent pending technology called transparent move technology. And what that does is, it's pretty unique because it doesn't sit in front of all your data or metadata. It sits behind the data path, and it moves files into an object store, but makes them look like they're still on the primary storage. So when you go into your Isilon or your NetApp, if you go into a folder where we move files, your users will still see the files as if they're still on the NetApp. And if you right-click on it, you will see all its properties, all its metadata exactly as before, but now this file is an object on Cloudian. And when you open it, then Komprise actually goes and converts that object back to a file and returns it, and that whole handshake is transparent. So for users, there is no disruption or change when data is going from a file environment into an object environment like Cloudian, and this is not in front of all your data. So 99% of your access is happening to hot data, to data that your users are actively using, and that data is still sitting on your primary storage. And Komprise is not in the path of that data. Cloudian is not in the path of that data. So we are invisible to your hot data and your hot metadata. The only thing that we are involved in is when cold data gets accessed, which is very, very infrequent, and that access is transparent. Also, when we're moving the data, we're keeping the data in its original format in Cloudian. So when the data is sitting in Cloudian, the data is fully accessible as a file or an object directly from Cloudian itself. So now, I hope you got a good sense of what Komprise does. Komprise is a software solution that helps you manage the data. It gives you visibility and analytics across your data, and it moves data based on your policies into Cloudian, and it preserves transparent access. And with Cloudian, we're able to save our customers well over 70% of their costs. And so, John will share more of how Cloudian is able to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Krishna. So Krishna mentioned a number of times about moving this data into Cloudian, and she also mentioned the word object. So what is this Cloudian object thing? So Cloudian is on-premises enterprise storage. That is the type of storage is object storage. Now, some people are familiar with object storage. If you're not, this is the storage type that the cloud is built on. So Google, Amazon, Microsoft are all built on a storage technology called object storage. And the reason for doing this, the reason for having object storage, is scalability. If you're just moving data from a NAS device into something which is similar to a NAS device, where would be the benefit? You need to move it to something which is fundamentally different. And that's what object storage is. It brings scale and cost effectiveness that you just don't get in any other enterprise storage type. And the reason is because it's simple and modular. The object storage environment grows organically by simply adding nodes. There's no data migration, there's no disruption in adding on capacity. As the environment grows, you simply add on nodes, and that creates more capacity in the environment. So as a result of that, you can start small with a small number of nodes and scale to over an exabyte simply by growing the overall environment. And that's what makes object storage very, very different. It's the reason why the cloud providers built on that storage technology, is because they knew they needed scale, and that's exactly what the object storage technology delivers. So if you think about it in the overall storage landscape, how does it fit in? Well, you're familiar with traditional NAS like EMC and NetApp. You're familiar with fast storage like Pure. Those really occupy about 20% of the landscape in terms of the bytes to be stored. There's a lot of data that needs to be frequently accessed and requires performance, but there's a much greater percentage that simply is not that frequently used and really just needs a place to sit where it is readily accessible. In other words, it can be immediately accessed from disk, but doesn't need to be accessed in a very, very high IOP, kind of transactional way. And that data, that 80% of the data, we think of as capacity data. And that's, you can think of that as being video information, big data, medical imaging, bioinformatics, data from factory floor, big data collections. Any place where you've got a very, very large amount of data that is relatively infrequently accessed is perfect for the object storage environment. So that's exactly why this storage type exists. And the reality is it is the industry's most scalable and easily grown storage type. If you look at the storage environment, it grows as your requirements need. So it's limitless capacity. You can grow simply by adding nodes, starting with nodes as small as 96 terabytes each, which can then be added on to create larger and larger storage environments. And as the environment grows, performance grows as well. So you eliminate bottlenecks by providing a seamless storage environment where workload is distributed across all the different nodes in the environment. The second thing about this is that the environment can span multiple physical locations. So instead of being limited to storage in just one place that's addressable, you can spread storage to multiple locations which are all addressable as one. And that's really important because that means that this environment can grow in a geographical way, in a performance way, and also in a capacity way, all at the same time. So those are really what set object storage apart, and that's why the cloud was built on object storage. The beauty here is we're taking that same technology and putting it right in your data center. In the course of doing that, it's actually lower cost than public cloud. Because it's all built on industry standard hardware, costs can come down easily down to as low as 0.5 cents per gigabyte per month, which is about 70% less than public cloud storage. So it's very, very cost effective, very scalable, and very easy to manage, all in your data center. Having said all that, it also ties in with the public cloud. We mentioned hybrid cloud as being something people want to leverage for disaster recovery. That's also a part of the solution. Because it's built on the same technology as the cloud, you can replicate data to the cloud for disaster recovery, giving you an on-prem solution that is great for meeting your RPO, RTO objectives, and a remote solution which is great for disaster recovery. Having said all that, this is a solution which is very versatile. We operate as a backend to Komprise, a great archive repository for less frequently used file data. It's also great for other kinds of solutions such as conventional backup. If you want to back up application servers, for example, we work with partners such as Rubrik to provide another environment for that. So it's something that can be used in multiple ways across your environment and grow to accommodate all those different use cases. So it's very versatile, very flexible, very cost effective. And with that, I'll turn it over to Krishna to conclude us out.
Perfect. Thanks, Jon. So, hopefully you got a sense of how Komprise and Cloudian work from this presentation. We started by giving you two customer examples. So let's go back to those examples and show you how they leveraged our joint solution. So the first example, if you remember, was the real estate firm that needed to modernize its backups. So what we did in that case, actually a reseller who was selling the modern backup solution, in this case it was actually Rubrik that the customer was wanting to deploy, brought Komprise and Cloudian in, and Komprise did an analysis on their environment, our software did, and it showed them that most of their data was cold data. And by offloading that data to Cloudian and then backing up the hot data, they could actually buy a modern backup solution like Rubrik for 20% of their data and still keep costs well under control. They could still be saving money. And that's exactly what we have done. So the customer is using Rubrik for their backup solution for the hot data. They're using Komprise to move the cold data into Cloudian, and all the data is fully accessible. All the backup process was unchanged because the backup of the hot data includes links to the cold data. So if you want to do a restore from it, it's all intact, and the cold data is getting stored on a resilient store, so it's not like you're losing any availability of it. But essentially, you're able to cut down the cost. Because that footprint is unchanging, you don't have to repeatedly keep backing it up. And you don't have to back it up on a mission-critical environment where you need instant restores because the cold data is really not getting access. So by offloading cold data from backups, we were able to cut about 70% of their costs and enable the customer to move to a modern backup solution. The second example that we had given you was a research university that had a lot of legacy data. And so that customer was coming up on a refresh of their NAS environment. And with, again, by offloading their cold data using Komprise, they archived that transparently to Cloudian. The customer was actually able to afford going to flash for their hot data. So they were able to upgrade their NAS for less cost and get a better environment than what they had before and still accommodate data growth. Also, another benefit is because we're moving data and keeping it in its native format in the cloud and in Cloudian, that means that down the road, if you want to run research directly on the object store without going back to the NAS, you can actually do that. So it also is giving you a diversified strategy. You no longer have to rely only on the primary storage to access your data. You can literally access your data from anywhere with all the metadata intact at every level. So those were the two examples that we started with. So I wanted to just kind of bring it back full circle and share with you how these two customers benefited from our joint solutions. We wanted to keep this session pretty interactive. If you have questions, please feel free to enter them in the questions window, and Jon and I would be happy to answer them for you. And I don't know if there are any questions already. So let's check.
Yeah, thank you, Krishna. This is Jonathan again. We have quite a number of questions, so this is great. The first one we have is, does this also work seamlessly with Commvault?
Yeah, so I think the question is around backup solutions in general, and yeah, absolutely. So Cloudian provides a backend to virtually every storage environment there is, including Commvault, Rubrik, Veeam, Veritas, etc. So yes, absolutely, it works with whatever the backup environment is. And of course, part of the advantage here is that this provides you an alternative. You can use conventional backup for your application servers. You can use conventional backup for your NAS. However, part of the advantage here is that this provides an alternative to that backup environment, thereby lowering your overall costs.
Great.
Yeah, and
Thanks.
I just wanted to add one point to that. I'm not sure if this is what the person asking the question was referring to, but solutions like Commvault, typically what happens is you can continue to run the backup process exactly as you were running it before after we have archived cold data. And what happens is now what the backup, it's just the size of the backup will shrink significantly. So our solutions work with Commvault, Veeam, Rubrik, Cohesity, it doesn't really matter, any backup environment. And when you do the backup with that backup solution, if you were backing up a petabyte previously, and then let's say we moved 80% of the data out, you're now backing up a little over 200 terabytes. So you're backing up just the hot data and some links, that are left on the primary storage. And all these backup solutions are set up to not follow the links. So they won't cause a rehydrate of everything. The data will get backed up. It will look like you have everything in the backup. And when you go to access the data or restore it from the backup, Komprise will actually then point for the cold data back to the Cloudian. So the integrity of the backup is intact, but you've just shrunk the backup size significantly.
Great. Thank you, Krishna. Another question I have is, what happens if I stop using Komprise?
Yeah. It's a great question. Komprise works with all your storage environments via standard protocols. So we work with your storage via NFS, SMB, and S3. And when we move data, Komprise itself doesn't store anything. It's mostly a stateless solution. All the data and the metadata is kept on your own primary and secondary storage. So at any point, if you want to stop using Komprise, literally what will happen is no new data will get analyzed or moved. All the data that you already moved continues to be accessible. Komprise also gives you ways where you can recall everything back if you want to. So you can unwind everything fully if you want that, but you don't have to. You can leave data where it was moved to, and the integrity of the data is fully intact, and you can turn the environment off, and it just won't move any new data, but everything you already moved is fully accessible from all your different environments.
Okay, great. Another question I have is, once data is moved to Cloudian, how is it backed up?
Yeah, this is one of the beauties of the object storage environment in Cloudian in specific, is that the data is resilient within Cloudian. There's never a single copy of data. It's always stored in a highly fault-tolerant environment. Cloudian starts at 3 nodes. That's the smallest configuration. And data is always stored in some kind of a resilient way across those nodes. And that could be using a striping technology where data is striped across the 3 nodes, or you can use data replication technologies where the data is replicated on multiple nodes. But in every case, data is always resilient and protected from either node failure, or you can even protect against site failure by replicating across multiple sites. You can have a Cloudian cluster at site A and site B, and they're automatically replicating between them. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, we do integrate with cloud. So if you want to replicate to, say, AWS Glacier for a very low-cost DR copy, that too is built in as a feature of Cloudian. So there's no extra software license, no extra features to add. It simply is built in. You can replicate to AWS Glacier and have a DR copy off-site at very low cost.
Great. Keep the questions coming, guys. There's a lot of good ones. Another one I have is, how does Komprise address file retrieval if a file is archived but the stub is removed, perhaps by accident?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. Could you repeat it?
Oh, sure. How does Komprise address file retrieval if a file is archived but the stub is removed, perhaps by accident?
Yes, absolutely. So when Komprise moves the data, it leaves behind a link on the original file server, the way Komprise does it, it has no single point of failure. Komprise is a highly available solution. meaning that if somebody deleted the link by accident, for example, Komprise will actually, it runs cleanup periodically, and it can actually restore the link. So if somebody deleted the link, the data on Cloudian is not actually deleted. It's just moved to a temporary hidden location, and if the deletion was by accident, Komprise can actually restore the link. And you can set policies on how deletion should happen. If you want to, if a delete of a link should not cause any deletion at all, or if a deletion of a link should cause deletion after the snapshots have aged out. So you can actually set policies on it, but it's completely resilient. And actually, this is related to another question I saw in this window. Somebody said, I'm assuming Komprise doesn't need to be in the data path, and therefore does the VM need to be on-site to work effectively? And if it doesn't use stubs, does it use symbolic links? Maybe I can answer that as well, Joseph, because it's very related to this other question.
Sure.
So, Okay, so yes, Komprise does not need to be in the data path. And when we say we're not in the data path, we mean the entire data path, data and metadata, because some solutions say they're not in the data path, but they are in front of all the metadata, which for all practical purposes means they're in the data path. But we are not in front of any of your hot metadata or data. And do the VMs need to sit on site? Well, Komprise does analyze the data on your storage, and when cold data is accessed, it is intermediating that access. So for those reasons, you may want to put the Komprise observer VMs on site. It is a hybrid service. So the director, the console that I showed you, typically runs in the cloud. You could actually put the observers also in the cloud, but most customers put the observers on site just for the speed of the analysis. We don't use traditional stubs. We use symbolic links, but more importantly, the transparent move technology does something called dynamic links. And what I mean by that is the problem traditional solutions had is when they moved data, they would literally leave behind a pointer to the new location of the file. And the problem with that approach is that if that pointer, whether you call it a stub or a link, if it got deleted, there was no way to get to the file. So there was a lot of issues with orphaned files or missing files, and etc. With Komprise, you have none of those issues because what we leave behind is actually kind of like a DNS lookup. It's dynamically bound, and so we have no failure if the link is deleted or if your data is moved multiple times. It's completely resilient to all those things, and that's what the patents behind that DMT technology are all about. Okay, back to you, Joseph.
Thank you. I have another one. Is it easy to migrate off Microsoft solutions to Cloudian?
Yeah, so the Microsoft environment, you can look at that two ways. One is obviously Microsoft Cloud, and the Azure environment is something we connect to, and we can transparently move data back and forth between Azure and Cloudian. So they both are object storage. They're slightly different in their construction. However, we do interoperate directly with it. We connect directly to Azure and provide you a seamless interchange between those two environments. Within the data center, Microsoft applications typically are talking, the SMB protocol, and Cloudian does have a connector to talk to SMB. So absolutely, you can also use Cloudian as application data storage for Microsoft applications in the data center. Lastly, we do operate with some connectors such as Veritas Enterprise Vault that would connect Microsoft email Outlook Exchange servers to storage. We can also interoperate with those to provide you with a path into your email archiving. So whether you're talking about cloud or applications or enterprise apps like email, absolutely we can interoperate with all of them.
Perfect. Well, I think that's all the questions we have for today. Thank you very much for everyone who joined us. We hope to see you guys all again. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to email them to us or tweet them to our handles.